Great. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people in the room and online as well. Welcome to our International Research Showcase seminar today with two wonderful colleagues who need no introduction at all. Professor Bogan He from the Deakin University and Professor Ron Levy from the Australian National University School of Law. They will be talking about their joint research entitled Critical Geopolitics, Why and How Combine Strategic Empathy and Public Deliberation. So the time allocated for their talk is half an hour, and time and it sends signs when it closes to expire. And then there will be time for Q&A for the additional half an hour. So over to you, Bogdan and Ron, and a very warm welcome again to our center.
Okay, thanks so much. So I'm just going to speak for about 5 minutes to explain the wider project, and then Bogdan will talk about an application of that wider project. So the wider project is called Deliberative Peacemaking, with over 30 scholars from around the world, including a couple of people right here, who have contributed to it, the book that's due out this year. So I'm just going to talk about the book, again, to sort of situate the narrower application that we're speaking about. So deliberative peacemaking is about, well, let's say about seven things, so about 7 points. First of all, it's about the crisis of contemporary peacemaking. So we start the book with a sort of stark reality, which is that violent conflict is rising, and successful peace settlements are declining. So armed conflicts are more numerous, more internationalized, harder to resolve, and peace agreements are fewer and more fragile. So the core premise of the book is that there's a problem with how peacemaking is currently practiced, especially its inability to generate durable and trusted settlements. So point number 2 is that there are limits to the traditional inclusion paradigm. So for about 3 decades, peacemaking is centered on inclusion, so bringing women in civil society and youth and marginalized groups into the peace process. So this is a shift that's normatively very important and necessary, but inclusion alone doesn't tell us how people should engage with one another. So poorly structured inclusion, think of, for example, the UN Security Council or any local peacemaking efforts, if it's haphazard, can reproduce power inequalities. It can intensify the polarization, can turn the peace table into a place of power-based bargaining rather than genuine problem solving. Point number 3, our key move in the book is to go from inclusion to deliberative inclusion. So the book as a whole argues that deliberation is a missing variable. And deliberation, as you know, means structured, informed, potentially facilitated discussion, oriented to mutual reason giving rather than strategic bargaining. It doesn't replace inclusion. It tempers and informs and improves inclusion. So the central claim in the book is that peacemaking works better when democratic inclusion is filtered through deliberative institutions that promote listening and reflection and justification of claims in terms that others can accept. So point 4, deliberation can help make agreements. Armed conflicts usually rest on deep normative disagreements about territory, just resource allocation, sovereignty, rights, and so on. So unstructured debate, so talk alone, for example, often merely entrenches these divides. So deliberative procedures, by contrast, can bring to the surface shared public values, and potentially can enable fair compromise and help parties move from zero-sum claims to workable accommodations. So deliberation makes agreements more possible. Still not easy, of course, but at least agreement is feasible, where otherwise it might be entirely out of reach. Point 5, deliberation can help build trust, and peace requires trust. For example, in agreements that parties sign or trust in each other over the long term. If disputes and even renewed fighting are to be avoided, then there has to be that trust. But trust is in scarce supply in conflict societies, almost by definition. So deliberative democratic institutions often generate trust under certain circumstances, There's a complex body of empirical work on this, but some of it quite strongly suggests that deliberative democracy can be trust enhancing. And the reason for that is that you have a combination of voice given to particular groups, along with reason giving and rigor and sound and fair policy. So people perceiving this combination will tend to think that this respectful and more informed and balanced and inclusive procedure is something that they can trust a little bit more. So deliberative democracy and its trust enhancing effects matter for reaching agreements and potentially for maintaining them. So point 6, we're talking here about institutional innovation mostly, and not just mere idealism. So we're not proposing abstract ideals only, but also institutional design, mini publics, of course, but also mixed commissions, which are a little bit different. They're appointed, but still potentially deliberative. Legacy forums, deliberative referendums, online deliberative forums, and more. So the focus also is on incremental and comparative improvement. We're not talking about perfection. So the question is whether a deliberative institution, for example, works better than alternatives, not whether we've perfected peacemaking. So institutionally confined deliberation often is indeed more effective than unstructured deliberation in the public sphere. And finally, what we're doing here is, with the book, Deliberative Peacemaking, is trying to construct a hybrid interdisciplinary field where we have deliberative democracy and also peace and conflict studies. So we're using conflict research to expose obstacles in deliberative democracy, like power dynamics and justice dilemmas that maybe some deliberative theory has yet to confront fully. Then conversely, we're bringing deliberative democracy into peace and conflict studies. So this hybrid field is aimed at real-world conflict management at every phase of peacemaking and peacekeeping and peace building. So on that note, I'll pass over to Bao.
Thank you, Long. Long already touched on this critical geopolitics. So what I do is try to look at specific issue. How can we combine strategic empathy, which is quite popular in international relation discipline, and with the public deliberations. So before I do that, this is a summarized around 7 points. Before I will say a few words about recently passed away about Habermas. So I treat this seminar takes this seminar as a sort of a tribute to Habermas' speech. I met him in 1992. One of the issues we touched on, I said, if we fail to reach consensus, what do we do? And his answer at that time is, let's continue discuss. Well, I said, no, that can't reach agreement again. Yeah, continue talk, he said. Then I said, I'll push again. He said, continue talk 3 and 4 times. But I was surprised that he insists continuation dialogue. This spirit is so important in today's geopolitics. So if you really think about this kind of the war in the Ukraine, in Iran, the people just mostly let the military might decide. But then I think that in the end of the day, people probably will still return to the common sense, return to deliberation, finally find a solution. So I would say that this paper is really in this kind of spirit. Continue to explore how we best build a world order in public deliberation discussion rather than use brutal force. So the main argument is that geopolitical conflict escalate when the strategic reasoning become discursively closed. Deliberation failure is one of the contributing factors that worsen geopolitical conflict. It is what John Jacek said, termed discursive closure, premature narrowing of the acceptable viewpoints that excluding dissidents or unconventional perspective. So I think in the context, like the Australia context, when the office was announced, there's no debate. Everyone don't know. So this is an issue. So the what we try to argue is kind of a sort of a deliberate strategic empathy. That's the combined strategic empathy with the public deliberation. So combined, they call the deliberate strategic empathy. That will open discursive space by institutionalizing perspective taking across elites and societies. So before I do that, just briefly the definition issues that defines the first deliberation as Ron already said, refer to a form of practical reasoning. So I'll probably just stop here. Everyone will take granted the fact we will know that. But here I've just said a few words about strategy. So strategy refers to the matter located with the security domain, issues that implicate sovereignty, territory integrity, alliance commitment, deterrence, so on, so on. So the strategies. So when the scholar talking about strategic empathy, sometimes they use a strategy to refer to how to increase strategic competition capacity. So in develop this deliberate strategic empathy. So I should say clearly, we excluding this instrumental use of the empathy. So strategy here does not mean strategic manipulation of deliberation for geopolitical purpose. So that's the idea. So empathy denotes a structure and a reciprocal effort to understand how one's adversary perspective threats, risk, dignity with a strategic domain. It is a disciplined attempt to reconstruct others' security reasoning from within their own history, institution, and ideological framework. So the content is a lot of writings about strategic empathy. The best one author is White. He since 1980, he published a serious article in political psychology. So he makes a very important distinction that is empathy is different from sympathy. So the strategy is they are talking about strategic empathy, not a sympathy. Those are two different things. And the commentary is 2 or 3 years ago, McMaster, he was a very important person who provided a national security advisor under the Trump first term. He published a book about strategic empathy. But the way he uses strategic empathy is primarily as a tool for effective strategy in geopolitical competition. So it is so he used the term, you use a strategic empathy is as a way to against this very narrow strategic narcissism. That is means that a tendency to view the world only through one's own assumption and design. So then he said, in order to compete with China, especially we need strategic empathy, understand well the rivalry components, their views. So that's they use strategic empathy. So this talk treats the strategic empathy differently. Not just in order to, the strategic empathy in their understanding, in realist understanding, is a strategy of win the war. But here we try to treat strategic empathy as a tool of conflict management, conflict resolution. It's aimed to reconciliation, peaceful coexisting, deliberative understanding, and moral recognition. So when I use this strategic empathy in this kind of purpose, direction, it really changes how the way we interpret strategic empathy. And so if you look at this the strategic empathy literature, one of the weakness is really their focus on this how to develop a strategy from the other rivals' perspective, then develop effective strategies. And it ultimately is a win the war. It's not to avoid the war or not to end the war. So it's develop effective competitive strategies. So it is limited to understand the other's perspective within pragmatic, power-oriented logic. So it is unlikely to yield a more constructive approach to manage a geopolitical conflict. So the narrow realistic concept of strategy empathy tended to separate from the deliberation, overlooking the rule of the public deliberation. So what I try to argue is that without deliberation, those kind of empathy is very fragile. So it's very fragile. And of course, without the empathy, deliberation is also ambiguous. So we need to combine it together. So several scholars already touch on how to combine the strategy empathy with the deliberation. So one scholar, Helen, a few years ago, he said that deliberation can foster empathetic understanding, which constitutes epistemic goal distinct from the truth trackings. The primary value of deliberation lies not only in produce accurate belief, but in facilitate mutual understanding and emotional connection among the participants. So very important that for Helen is different from White. Why is it separate the empathy from the sympathy? He is trying to close. So in the end of the day, when we have empathy, slowly we should develop towards a sympathy, then emotionally connection. So this become a more effective way to conflict resolution. Other ways similar, they understand, underscope the deliberative dimension of empathy in the strategy setting. So increase perspective taking and maintain empathetic concern. Party can better anticipate move by others, understand their interests, respond more strategically, and perhaps reach better mutual agreements. But that's related to Ron earlier points. So what I try to do is based on those existing their writing and try to advance some of the thinking about deliberate strategy as empathy. So I will move a strategy empathy from psychology to institution. It's the empathy is not only the leader's psychological virtue. It's more related to the institution of the civil society, institution of public deliberation. And I bring the deliberate democracy into the geopolitics that is called a critical geopolitics. Then I'll try to link the elite diplomacy with the public deliberations. And here is conceptually, I try to first look at the cognitive level, look at how empathy is involved, form. Then look at the institutional level, look at how empathy stabilized. Then the final look at the political level, how the empathy can make a contribution to conflict mitigations. So first, I think that we need to distinction this deliberate strategy empathy from the other three theories. One is realist strategy empathy. Their goal is to win geopolitical competition. DSE is a goal is to try to stabilize rivalry, is a manage rivalry. And so it found a way peaceful coexist. The liberal dialogue diplomacy, that means liberal emphasize to manage the geopolitical conflicts is one best way is through the diplomacy rather than through the military conflict. So here the DSE share with the same perspective, but the DSE is one of the try to look at the conflict management under the rivalry. So it's try to find a way that two great power, but the rivalry can find a way kind of coexist, get along well. And then they will have a track to diplomacy. They're also talking about informal elite dialogue. But the DSE, one difference is not only look at elite dialogue, but other look at the public deliberation. That's another critical element. So let's take a touch to that. So let's look at this as just a conceptual level, the three level. One is a cognitive level. I think there's a three letter of the DSE, so deliberate strategic empathy. So this is about how empathy develop. So first level is a cognitive empathy. That is understanding adversary strategic culture, historical memory, and their threat perception. Its goal is to reduce misperceptions. Empathy reduce misperception within security dilemma. So DSE function as a communicative mechanism that mitigate the security dilemma by reconstructing adversary threat perception within a shared deliberative framework. That's the first level. The second step is a normative recognition through the acknowledge dignity, status equalities, and legitimacy of the concern. Its goal is to reduce humiliation and narratives. The third level is a strategic restraint. The empathy becomes operational through the concession, restraint, accommodation, and its goal is a conflict de-escalation. So those are three levels. Originally, I have a different kind of three levels. It's really the first level is how to move from the empathy towards sympathy. So I'm still not sure these issues I leave away, but I think the issue is still important. If we really make us deliver strategy empathy can become a tool for conflict resolution in geopolitical context. It is important how to move the empathy towards sympathy. Then at the institutional levels, that is the issue is how to make the empathy become credible, durable, rather than the empathy. If empathy is if only relying on individual leader, individual psychology, so it is fragile. So to some extent, the early days, the Trump have a little bit of empathy towards the Chinese, some concerns, but those are fragile. You don't know what's happening. So one of the important issues, empathy is from a lot of the case study which I discuss later on. So empathy is not merely a psychological virtue possessed by leader. It is a political mediate capacity that must be embedded within communicative condition, discursive platform, and procedural guarantees. So procedural mechanism render empathy credible. So one of the examples is instruments such as the joint effects funding, verification regime, crisis hotline, pre-commitment to deliberation before use of force, transform empathetic understanding into observable restraints. Then the other is discursive representation and communicative practice render empathy meaningful. In this context, John has been always emphasized discursive representations. The issue is so important. So we need when it is dialogue, you need to look at a variety of the different kind of the discourse rather than choose one or two narrative. So mutual recognition of the core security concern carefully framed joint statements, historical acknowledgement, and deliberative language in summary, in leader summary, help signal respect and strategy equality. Those acts are not only merely rhetorical, they function as a status stabilized device that mitigate humiliation narrative and reduce escalation incentive. Then the third element is a societal deliberation platform, render empathy durable. The track to dialogue, media forum, business, academic, diplomacy, and public deliberation, expanding empathetic reasoning beyond elite circles. When the empathy circles socially, rather than remaining leader-centric, it acquires democratic legitimacy and resilience against the domestic political shock. So then at the political level, there are three mechanisms that is how DSE influence geopolitics. The one is the discursive corrections. So public deliberation challenges the threats, inflation, enemy stereotype, ideological closure. So one of the examples is the Vietnamese War debate in the United States. I'll come back to this later on talking about. Then the other is a legitimacy constraint. Public deliberation raise the political costs of escalation. For example, anti-war movement and parliamentary debate and media scrutiny. Then the final is empathy diffusion. Public discourse spread the perspective taking across the society. These stabilize diplomatic compromises. So one of the issues in this DSE is try to integrate elite dialogue and public deliberation. So strategic empathy, the literature, narrowly focus on the elites dialogue. So when we add this deliberate strategic empathy, is try to bring this public deliberation in. And I think I'll run a bit of time, so just quickly. So one of the issues is Hendricks talking about in her article, talking about integrate deliberation, reconcile civil society dual rule in deliberative democracy. So if we pick up some ideas, so the citizen influence elites can operate through the deliberative influence. There's a kind of two pathways. One is the civil society working with the society, for example, like deliberative polling. They work with the government. Then through the deliberative polling, you produce recommendation. Then you try to influence government decision. The other is the civil society protest movement. They are against the state. Through those protests, they exercise moral pressures on the state to change its policy. Then the other is a communicative network and amplify both the process by enabling large-scale circulation of the public discourse. Here's a very important role of the media. The best example, again, is the anti-Vietnam War in the United States in the 1960s. The other problem is if we follow this deliberative democracy, the deliberative principle that should be kind of guiding to stretch elite dialogue. So I here list a few, but those points are not. It's not only just exploration. It's a kind of summary of the empirical evidence. So I did a lot. I did a chapter for around that. So doing a lot how historical they manage the mitigate geopolitical conflict. So if we do those things, they are more likely to happen. And here's one of the issues. It's very interesting. I recently looked at some archive. Deng Xiaoping have a long talk bred whiskey. So he set up some rules for how U.S. and China can restore the normal relationship. And one Deng Xiaoping said, I think each side is free to state its view without any constraint. And he said Chinese side speaks straightforward. He said Mao Zedong is a soldier, Zhou Enlai is a soldier, I'm a soldier. All the soldiers speak straightforward. So this is the way we should conduct our dialogue. So I looked at a few cases, but give you time, just very quickly. So the case of Australia recognized the China. So here, for example, the discourse correction. So in the government position, so restore establish diplomatic relation with China is a correction. So the frame this as a discourse correction. The case of Gorbachev's historical decision allowed a unified Germany. So not only is the decline of the Soviet Union, but also is a very important, it's a civil society group in both West and East Germany. They campaign, sending a strong message to the Gorbachev. So he gets the message. So this, and the Vietnam War, again, so at the elite level, Zhou Enlai talking about Kissinger. Now you should understand why the Vietnam fighting. Because for their historical reason, not just for ideology communism, really for their determination, preserve their against the French colonization, and but also shift in this public debate, the larger scale protests in the United States. That is an exercise of moral pressure, force the American government change the war policy. The other case is so people might kind of see a counterexample. Now China is authoritarian, no public deliberation, no civil society. But if you think about the Chinese under the late Mao period and the Deng Xiaoping period, they changed the policy. In particular, the policy towards the United States, reconciliation approach, largely is a domestic deliberation, larger scale of the everyday talk, kind of protest is a kind of cultural revolution. And this constitutes a foundation for the government changing its foreign policy. So I think I skip over them. We can easily find a lot arguments against this DSE. So many arguments. So I skip over. But let me just final kind of say the field of reflection. So DSE is not naive. It does not assume harmony. Nor does it eliminate conflict. It acknowledges power asymmetry, security dilemma, ideological competition. But DSE makes a conflict governable. And it assumes that without mutual understanding, rival becomes self-fulfilling towards a war. And finally, just four main conclusions. Without deliberation, empathy is fragile. Without empathy, deliberation is empty. And strategy empathy becomes politically effective only when it is institutionalized through deliberative practice. Geopolitical rival become dangerous, not simply because of conflict interests, but because of discursive closure. Finally, deliberate strategy empathy transform empathy from a leader's psychological virtue into a socially distributed political capacity.